Getting technology, this is the Webster Reading 6 lecture. Getting technology life cycles in sync. If you're working for a company that has a business that's perhaps not directly creating, it's not a software company or whatever, it has to deal with business cycles and market forces. In other words, it has competition, it has things it needs to do which may be irrelevant to the, or completely disconnected from the time it takes to actually bring new internal systems into development. And so you have this problem with adoption and use of IT when you want to go out and acquire IT either to keep up with your competing firms or to gain a competitive edge. And there are 4 particular problems that I identify here. The first, Firefly. I was thinking about this some when you're talking about all the different blockchain frameworks. It's kind of like there's this great new technology coming out. Okay, this is going to be so cool. It has its advantages, and we're waiting for 1.0 to be released. And either 1.0 never quite makes it out the door, or 1.0 is like, well, this is an interim, or this is a minimal release, but there's great stuff coming. And you chase this firefly. How many of you ever actually lived where there are fireflies? I have. Not until I was quite older. It's when my wife and I and 4 of our kids moved to Virginia about 20 years ago. They're magical, quite frankly. I had seen ads and everything else. It's not the same as seeing them in person. It really isn't. But they light up in front of you, and then they disappear, and then they light up about 10 feet away, and then they disappear, and then they light up about 20 feet away, and they disappear. And you're trying to figure out where they are, and you're trying to chase after them. Capturing a firefly is actually a pretty cool thing to do because they're not easy to catch. But you see technologies that come onto the market that are like fireflies. They light up, it's like, oh, this is going to be so great, this is going to make things easy, this is going to be wonderful, and then the light goes out. And then it pops up again, oh, someone else is doing this, or oh, they really are coming out for real, or someone bought up the company and they're releasing this. So you need to be careful. Underdone. Okay, my favorite story, and I mentioned this in the article back. This would have been about 1990, 91. I was writing for Macworld magazine. It's Macworld Expo, and I was meeting with Apple's product manager over their operating system. And they just announced at Macworld and were releasing Systems 7.0. This was the new release of the Mac operating system. And I was doing a one-on-one meeting. I wrote a column called State of the Mac. And we went through everything, and at the end, the product manager, I don't remember his name offhand, bless his heart, and he said, what do you think? And I said, well, before our interview, I was out wandering the show floor, and I saw a guy with a t-shirt that said, I'm waiting for System 7.0.1. And the guy just looked pained, and I said, that's the truth. You don't adopt .0 releases. How many here use iOS? iPhones, iPads? After I had upgraded to 11.0.2, I saw the notices saying, don't do it! Because it has problems with covering up when you're trying to type text. It pops up the keyboard, and the keyboard covers up the field you're trying to type into. It's like, come on, I need to see what I'm typing. There is a risk in adopting underdone technology. So when you're having to adopt technology, and it's, again, these are all dealing with issues where you're out in the real world and you have to decide whether or not to use particular technology or whatever. Make sure, don't adopt a .0 release ever. At least wait for .1 or .0.1 or something, because they pushed it out the door. And they're almost certainly, this has sort of become a way of life. They're using the customer base as beta testers. They're final QA. Yeah, we'll just release it and then we'll collect all the bug reports and figure out which ones are most important. Conveyor belt, and I'm trying to think of a good example. Sometimes the technology comes out and the technology is going to be replaced. it's got a definite end of life. Maybe it's already out and you know it's got an end of life. It's kind of like saying, okay, I'm going to build this on Windows 7 because, for whatever reason, I like Windows 7 better than Windows 10, but I know that Microsoft has an end of life of support for Windows 7. Though, as we're going to see in a minute, Windows XP still has over 6% of the desktop market. So there are products which, when you look into it, you'll see will have some sort of end of life for whatever reason. It may be 2 or 3 or 4 years off, but if it's got an end of life, you're going to have to plan for that and say we have to be off this technology or have special support agreements by a certain date. Another variation of that comes with if you're modifying commercial off-the-shelf software or customizing it. That's not something you usually do with, say, Microsoft Word, but for larger packages, if you're talking like Oracle Financials or SAP or some of the packages like that, there's a fair amount of configuration and often a fair amount of customization that goes on. The problem is when they release the next version, that basically you can't upgrade to the new version unless you can repeat. You have the time, the money, and the access to resources, people with appropriate information, to go through and make all those same customizations to the new version. This is a classic issue that you'll find when you get out and you're watching organizations that adopt large customizable packages. And landfill is where there's big promise, big hoopla, and it just flops. How many people here are using Windows RT? How many people know what Windows RT is? Windows, oh, that's really scary. Because this is not old stuff. This is just from a few years ago. Microsoft was going to release a new type of tablet. This was one of their earliest Surface models. But it was going to use an ARM processor, not an Intel-based processor. So they developed a special, somewhat stripped down version of Windows to run on the ARM processor. And this was going to be sort of their response to the iPad, or at least part of it. That for low cost, you can get this reduced instruction set laptop. Wasn't Windows compatible. It only ran Windows RT. Microsoft took a $1 billion write-down on this. It was an utter flop. No one adopted it. No developers wanted to code for it because they had to write completely separate programs. It was different, There were enough variations on the user interface and everything else, on the APIs for the operating system and so on, that they had to. It was landfill technology. Go back 30 years, more, about 30 years. IBM went through the same thing. IBM wanted to enter the home market. And they came out with this computer that was going to be their, the IBM PC was a business computer, was a serious computer. So they're going to come out with a nice home computer called the IBM PC Junior. Had what was infamously known as the Chiclets keyboard, referred to just how cheap and uncomfortable the keys were to press. And it was a complete flop. And actually, there were units that were literally buried in landfill. And that's how bad the PC Junior was. So that's something else to keep in mind. And this is sort of like if accepting a 0.0 release is risky, accepting a 1.0 release is even riskier, because you want to wait and see what the market does. Yeah, or done.
So for landfills, it sounds like Windows RT had a lot of development and could show promise, but because so few people wanted it, does that make it put it in the landfill? Because
it does.
Dead on arrival, it's just not bought.
Yeah.
And not used.
Yeah. I mean, most landfill technologies were actually manufactured. There were a lot of IBM PC Juniors manufactured, and IBM couldn't sell them. The reviews were so bad, and people were so uninterested in it, that it just didn't go anywhere. Same thing happened with RT. I mean, the idea makes sense from a certain point of view, and it just flopped. You'll find analysis that still feels that this may be the flop of Windows RT and the Surface RT devices may be the final straw that led to Steve Ballmer getting eased out of Microsoft as CEO. So there are implications there. So that's just stuff to keep in mind. Okay, now we have the whole arc of engineering. This is again, and here I'm referring to on one side to commercial products, but also this happens with internal systems. You get a system, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes when we get to facts and fallacies. You get a system, it ships or goes into production, you continue to add features and so on, and it usually reaches a point at which things start to decline. You're getting diminishing returns, it's becoming harder. Well, as I put here, first, you have enough turnover and the system becomes sort of hacked together enough that no one understands it completely anymore. And so any fix or any enhancement now requires increasing amounts of effort to figure out what's there. You start to have changes made to different pieces that aren't necessarily compatible with each other. So you have what's commonly called software rot, software entropy, or whatever. The code base becomes less and less stable. The system outgrows its foundations. In other words, this is a system that was only ever intended to hold, say, 1 million records, and suddenly you're trying to push it to hold 1 billion. It's kind of like, okay, guys, you know, we've got baling wire and chewing gum here, but this thing really just isn't set up to do this. We're starting to reach performance choke points and so on. The market or the business needs shift. You can have a great product, but if no one wants or needs it anymore, it goes away. And it comes back years later as vintage. I'm old enough to have collected albums and then switched over to CDs. And now, I still wish I had all my albums. Actually, when we moved from Colorado a few years ago, we gave them to friends. And I didn't think to contact one of our sons who lived in Houston, who actually moonlights as a DJ. And he still hasn't forgiven me because we had like 2 boxes of vinyl albums from the 60s and 70s. And, he wants desperately to have them. Anyway, the developer begins that should be begins, to add blue sky or kitchen sink enhancements. This is sort of, you're getting more and more features in there that the original system was never intended to support or handle. And the challenge that backward compatibility has to be maintained. So, the idea from this is just be aware that, and we're going to see some of this in some of the facts in Glass, that over time systems become harder to enhance and to fix and become less stable and ultimately, you know, begin to decline. That said, if the interesting thing is that if you freeze changes at a certain point here, the systems can go on forever. Tony Gibson, who's the founder of OSG, where I was chief technical officer and so on, started out as a coder. One of the earliest projects he ever worked on was some small dedicated system to help manage cars at a railroad train yard. 25 years later, it was still in use. Mostly because it did what it needed to do. The scope of the problem hadn't changed. You know, train cars are train cars. The rail yard hadn't suddenly expanded. It was the same rail yard. And it just ran. And no one had tried to add features. No one could, because Tony had long since left and no one knew what it did. It was all probably all assembly code and, you know, on a dedicated system. But you know, if you snapshot stuff at the right spot, it can go on forever. If you snapshot it after it's turning bad, then you get to live with that forever.
question. Is that why you have, your a billion lines of COBOL language still in use, because it's been snapshotted and it's been preserved in a clean state?
A lot of it, yes, it works. A lot of it is out there because it just works and no one really wants to change it. However, there is a fair amount of new COBOL added each year. But that's a very good point. A lot of Y2K was a time when a lot of embedded, or a lot of not embedded as a microprocessor, but when a lot of entrenched systems finally got replaced because it was easier, because no one knew, because of these problems, no one understood the full architecture. It was going to be hard to change, so on and so forth. It was easier to simply replace a lot of those systems than to try and remediate them. Back in 1996, I did an article called Microsoft Windows Forever and Ever. This is not long after Windows 95 came out, and based on my own observations over 10 years of the software industry, I was saying Windows could still be dominant in 2025. We're 8 years away from that now, 2017. And guess what has a 90% market share of the desktop? It's Windows. That's that, so that, and the reasons I give in the article, I know this is a lot of text, so you have to just go read the article. First thing is that technology entrenches itself. My favorite example of this is the internal combustion car. There are actually a few different types of cars. Steam cars were actually quite popular at the turn of the 20th century. But the internal combustion car entrenched itself, and there grew up a network to support it. Roads, gas stations, repair stations, standardization on, say, tire sizes, design principles, competition, and so on. And people think, well, why haven't we all switched over to electric cars? It's because they're fighting a tremendous uphill battle. I can find half a dozen gas stations within a mile or so, maybe 2 miles, maybe a mile over to South University of my house. The expense, and that's an infrastructure that's grown up over the past 100 years. To try and build a parallel infrastructure to support electric cars is a tremendous uphill battle. And you see, oh yes, there is a charging station here. It's like, yeah, it's one charging station. And if I draw a 10-mile circle, there's 100 gas stations there. This happens with technology as well. With Microsoft, it's not just that you've got the operating system. You have Microsoft Word, and you have Microsoft Word documents, and you have Microsoft Excel documents, and you have NTFS file directories, and you have this whole set of people who depend on this stuff. There is a reason why you still have a, oops, wrong way, back here. Oh, there we go. Yes. Well, you still have a 6.5% market share of Windows XP. And note here, this is Windows 10, this is Windows 7. Windows 7 has almost twice the installed base of Windows 10. I mean, I like Windows 10. I was a little leery of it at first, but I bought a new, actually my trusty Asus ROG laptop here. And I really like Windows 10. But it's not like people have switched over wholesale. And then once the technology is out there, you tend to have, I mean, look at Microsoft's efforts over the last 20 years to upgrade Windows. It's like Star Trek films. Every other release crashes. Windows 95 was actually a major breakthrough for them. That was their first, that's where they really put distance between themselves and the Mac OS, largely because Apple had blown multiple opportunities to upgrade their own operating system. And you have 98, which is okay, and then you have Windows ME, which is the Windows which shall not be named. Again, you're all too young, but trust me, get someone who's old enough to remember Windows AFT, even non-technical people, and it was a disaster. And then you had Windows XP, and Windows XP was just like Windows 95, it was a major leap. And then you had Windows Vista. Windows Vista is buried in the other section here. Recognize that Windows Vista came out after Windows XP, was supposed to be a major improvement, and its market share currently is 0.5%. And then they came out to Windows 7, which was, again, it really was Windows Vista with all the really annoying and ugly stuff fixed. It was very successful. Note here, this is Windows 7, 46%. Look at Windows 8. Windows 8 and 8.1. How small a market share they have. And it was the same thing as with Windows Vista. Everyone said, "Oh, this really sucks. We don't want Windows 8." And it was a disaster for them. And then they came out with Windows 10, which they've been successful, but they're still having trouble getting people to move off of Windows 7. So you've got this problem of entrenchment. And again, my comment, and these are all things I wrote 20 years ago, that the sheer scale of adoption of Microsoft technology will basically argue against any broad changes. Now, what this doesn't foresee, but what I've written about elsewhere, but not in any of your readings, is that if you're going to try and replace a technology, you have to sidestep it. You have to make it so the new technology can be used without having to abandon the old technology. So what's been successful has not been an operating system which has gone head-to-head with Windows. It's been smartphones and tablets, Android and iOS. You know, you don't have to choose between the two. I mean, I've got my iPad, I've got my iPhone, and I have my Windows laptop. And it's that side-by-side that allows you to, if you start to put devices in your Windows market share, my gosh, it's probably down to about 20% at this point. And maybe even less than that, because you have so many more smartphones and tablets than you do desktop systems. So that's that lecture. Let's take a break till 3 o'clock. We'll come back, do roll, and we'll do the finish up facts and fallacies, and that'll be it for the day.